Welcome to my presentation about the state of the Drupal frontend. Even though I have a picture of the US Parliament here, I'm not comparing myself to Obama who is speaking there. It just reminded me of that. I thought it reminds me of that situation. Anyway, so this presentation is about my own perspective of like what is the current state of the Drupal frontend and like what has been improved, what should we be putting focus on next, and like what is going on there. I'm also going to introduce myself very quickly. Here's a picture of me in Doha, which is a very familiar city for me because I used to live in Australia and I flew through Doha almost every time to Europe to these events. On Drupal.org you can find me with a username Lauri with 3 eyes. It doesn't change depending on the service, it's always like 3 eyes. That's what it's supposed to be like. I'm a provisional Drupal framework manager, focusing on front end, meaning that I can commit some of the front end changes to Drupal core and can make decisions related to that. I'm also a team lead working for Druid in Finland, which is a Finnish Drupal company, around 25 people. And as far as I know, they are hiring people to be working in Helsinki, Finland. I currently live in Bangkok, as mentioned. So, reminder for everyone that there are sprints on Sunday at the Impact Hub, in case you are interested in maybe grabbing some of the issues that I'm talking about today to get them fixed.
Not my issues.
There are apparently some other people who are having issues as well, and they want you to fix their issues as well. So we probably can have a fight whose issues are we going to be sprinting on. Yeah. So let's start with the how are we keeping up the tools that we have in Drupal core up to date. It's very important that the tools that we have in Drupal core up to date because of the fact that the whole contrib, they rely on the tools that the Drupal core provides. In general, the contributed modules don't really add new libraries, especially if they are like larger libraries or frameworks or something like that. They definitely rely on what the Drupal core is providing. Therefore, it affects the whole ecosystem as a whole. Like, what kind of decisions do we make in Drupal core? What kind of tools do we provide there? And I made a very, very informal research about what kind of tools do front-end developers in general expect to have once they are working on building some things. What I did, I wrote the Google top JavaScript, top front-end things to learn in 2017 and took the first link and I took the list from there. And that's what I'm using as a list of things that someone expects to have. So it's a very informal way of doing research, but it seemed like a very reasonable list of things to be having on your front-end stack in 2017. Because it looks similar to what I've been using on the projects that I've been working with as well. So the first thing that I would expect that every front-end developer expects to have in 2017 is Bubble, which is a transpiler, which basically allows you to use the future features of JavaScript. So browsers run ES5, which is the old version of JavaScript. The most popular version probably right now is ES6, and Bubble transpiles your ES6 into ES5, meaning that you can write future-proof JavaScript and the browsers are able to run it. So that said, ES6 is definitely something that the front-end developers would expect in 2017. Another thing that I would expect that most front-end developers expect to have is some kind of a linter, basically making sure that you follow the coding standards. Coding standard checks for JavaScript can be very useful because they can also do a whole bunch of different kind of sanity checks, telling you if you are writing not so great JavaScript code. So you don't have to be that great JavaScript developer if you just have the right tools that will tell you that now you're doing something that you are not supposed to be doing. Another thing I think everyone expects to have is some kind of a package manager. Yarn is probably the most popular one in 2017. NPM works as well. Actually, I just read that NPM supports out of the box a log file. I just saw that today. I don't know when it happened, but I just saw it today. So maybe NPM would work as well now. Webpack is probably something that a lot of people would expect, it's a module loader for JavaScript. Some kind of a type validation library is must-have for JavaScript because JavaScript is not very good at managing types at all. So it's a little bit like PHP, but with the type validation library, you can definitely get it way better. So something like Flow or some other library might make it a lot better. A lot of people also expect some kind of a framework for managing state. So what do we actually have in Drupal Core currently? So we do have Babel and ES6 in Drupal Core since 8.4, which is amazing, which makes our stack a whole bunch of more future-proof. Because we already have this tooling that we transpile code from future-proof JavaScript into more older style JavaScript, which can be run by the browsers. We also have ESLint in Drupal Core. Since 8.4.x, we use the Airbnb coding standards instead of the old JavaScript coding standards made for Drupal, meaning that it's easy for anyone outside of Drupal community who has worked in the wider JavaScript community to start writing JavaScript for Drupal, which is amazing. I think the JavaScript developers absolutely will love this change in 8.4. We also do have Yarn in 8.4. As you can see, a lot of changes has happened in 8.4. Like, not many of these things used to exist before, which means that we have been doing a lot of keeping up to date. We don't have Webpack in Drupal Core even in 8.4. I don't think there's any plans to have Webpack at this point. I don't think there's any particular features that would require it, but probably later on there might be some things where it could be useful, but at this point we don't have it because it's just not relevant for us. We don't have any kind of type validation library. That's probably something that we should have in the future, meaning that we could do some type validation on the JavaScript, but there is a lot to learn in Drupal about type validation in general as well. I'm going to be talking about that later even more. We don't have a framework for managing state, but we do have Backbone, which is kind of the little bit more older style framework, which provides MVC model for Drupal. It also does some of the event handling, but it doesn't really do the whole bunch of the state handling that the modern JavaScript frameworks would be doing. We have also Underscore, which is a library which provides a lot of tools for functional programming. It's also a little bit less relevant since we have the ES6 now, because ES6 also comes with a bunch of these features, but a lot of people still use it in combination with ES6, so it haven't been removed yet. We also have jQuery in Drupal Core, which is probably not the most popular tool for front-end developers to pull into their stack if they get to start from scratch in 2017. Another thing that has been improved in Drupal Core on the JavaScript stack is that we've made the testing way better than it used to be. So 8.0.0 didn't have any kind of library for testing JavaScript. So we didn't have any test coverage for JavaScript. On 8.1, we included a new test base so that we can write tests for JavaScript. The major drawback on that test base that we added for Drupal Core is that it runs on PHP, meaning that if someone builds a feature using JavaScript, they still have to write their tests using PHP, meaning that every JavaScript developer who wants to work in the Drupal community has to know PHP, or they are unable to make a feature completely from zero to committed. There is, however, a lot of work happening around introducing a proper unit testing framework in Drupal Core. I think they're talking about including Mocha in Drupal Core. There's also another issue about adding integration tests that could be written in JavaScript. I think that was, we decided in Baltimore that we are going to use Nightwatch library for doing integration tests. So a lot of great things happening in the testing spectrum as well. And maybe some of this will be in the 8.4 or 8.5 still, because 8.4 is not feature complete yet, so we can still get features into the 8.4. About the JavaScript framework that we don't still have, we just have Backbone. Dries has actually proposed decoupling Drupal frontend in his blog, which essentially probably would mean that we will have to have some kind of a JavaScript framework or build one by ourselves, which I wouldn't expect to be the most popular option for Drupal developers. So we probably would have some kind of framework that we choose from the larger community. There is a group of people also working on a distribution which targets creating a demo of how these decoupled applications could work in practice for you. They have some kind of a JavaScript application that they're building, but they are also building some mobile applications and things like that to demonstrate how great decoupled Drupal can be. It's called Contenta, and there's about 10 people working on that. It's a great group of people, so if you're interested, it's a great initiative to work on. That's all about JavaScript. Let's proceed to the next topic that we have. Out-of-the-box experience. I don't know if how many of you remember how Drupal looks like when you install it. It looks like this when you install Drupal. Welcome to your site. No front page content has been created yet. So that's basically what you end up having when you install Drupal. This doesn't exactly match the experience that many of our competitors are able to give for their users. So there's a group of people who are working on improving this. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with Bartik. It's just that Bartik is getting kind of old. Let's see if I have an internet. I probably don't, so I cannot show this for you. I do have. So let's go to 2011. How does websites look like in 2011? And Bartik is even older than that. If we compare that to 2015, which is 2 years ago, websites look like, well, this is 2014, look like this. This is the same content, just delivered with according to the standards that the trends that were used during that year. I have to figure out how I get back. Yeah, great. So as you can see, web has changed quite a lot since 2011. I didn't even remember that websites looked like that in 2011. So it makes a lot of sense that Bartik is out of date because it hasn't been updated since that. So because of that, we have been working on creating a new design for Drupal Core, and this is basically what Drupal could look like when you install it out of the box. Instead of having this very generic theme trying to somehow create a brand for Drupal, we are creating a demo which represents a real-life use case. Therefore, people can relate to this somehow. They could think that, okay, maybe this could be my site, and then they could think that maybe their site could be built using Drupal. And the plan for that initiative is basically just to add content to Drupal during the installation, show a new and refreshed theme, and bundle them together in a new installation profile so that everything works beautifully when you download Drupal from Drupal.org and install it for the first time. And yeah, the idea is that everything is kind of internal, part of the product, instead of something that we suggest people to build their sites on. And the idea is also that we don't encourage people to build any kind of production sites using this new installation profile. Maybe if you have your site installed for longer than a week, maybe we kill your site or give you a warning message or something like that. We haven't still figured out the details, how are we going to implement that, but anyway, the plan is that it's just a demonstration mode of Drupal instead of something that people should build their sites on. So usability is one of the other areas that has been put a lot of effort into. 7 doesn't have any active maintainer, so if anyone's interested about usability, there's a very, very high-profile chance over there for anyone who wants to maintain 7. But there's a lot of efforts being done by the usability team, who has meetings every Tuesday, and they have made a lot of cool changes in the Drupal. We also have had 2 additional Drupal Core product managers being added. We have Roy and Gabor, and Roy is UX designer, so it's great to have a UX designer as a product manager for Drupal, meaning that when they're making any product affecting changes, they will have a UX designer as well involved in the decisions. That's something we've never had before. And one of the amazing things that the usability team managed to to change was the status report page, which now looks like this instead of the old table layout that we had. And we actually have Christina here, who is the one who designed this page. And I think this was the first time in Drupal when the design wasn't the problem. Design was amazing. We get it approved very quickly, but the technical implementation was difficult for us, and we were struggling with that. So while making these user-facing changes, we've come up with another problem, which is that the Drupal core markup is unable to evolve. So Drupal ships with a pretty wide range of different kind of themes. We have Start, which is basically just there so that the core developers can test how the module markup looks like. So it's not really anything that we suggest anyone else to enable. I don't know if there's any other valid use cases for that. We also have Stable, which is there just to hold the BC layer, to work as a BC layer for the markup that we used to have in 8.0.0. So we simply just copy all the markup from 8.0.0 into Stable, and now we can change markup in the modules. All templates here will be replaced before 9.0.0, meaning that it will have the new set of stable templates for the Drupal 9 whenever it gets tagged. Classy extends Stable. It contains a little bit more opinionated markup. So what Stable has, it doesn't have any classes. It doesn't have that many HTML5 elements. It's like very unopinionated markup that we have in Stable. But Classy instead has an opinionated set of markup rules that you can use by default, and that we kind of suggest people to use. It is also backwards compatible, so you can use it on your production sites. So Stable and Classy, go with those if you want your site to not break. We have two teams that are part of the product. We have Seven and Bardic. Seven is an admin team that we enable by default on the standard install profile. Bardic is the default team that the default team being enabled on the standard installation profile. And neither of these are backwards compatible. So if you make changes for Bardic and you've extended Bardic, it's your own fault that you've extended Bardic, because our backwards compatibility policy says that Bardic can change anything it wants because it's part of the product. It's not part of the APIs that we provide for you to build a site. Bardic is just there to demonstrate how to build a team, same as Seven. Seven is also the installer team. So here is the problem that we have right now, which is that we have Seven and Bardic and Core, which are perfectly fine. We can change whatever we want in these three places, and it's all fine. There's no problem. Then we have the Classy kind of in a miserable point in the middle, and we are unable to change anything there ever because of the Dries announced the new Drupal release cycle, which means that the Drupal 9 will be just the last Drupal 8 minor release without the BC layers. But there's no way for us to make any improvements for Classy because we don't have any BC layer for Classy. So Classy will be as it is forever unless we figure out a way how we can make these changes. So this is definitely one of the problems that we have right now. But the problem that I'm even more worried about than this is the fact that when we remove Stable, we will break Bardic and Seven because they rely on the Stable markup that we have in Stable. And once the BC layer gets removed, besides of breaking all of the size of you've built for clients, we also break all of the teams that we've built for ourselves. So we won't have any working admin teams, we won't have any working user-facing teams. This problem has not been solved by anyone yet, so if you want to work on something fun, that's definitely something that we need help on Sunday. We need to solve this before Drupal 9, and I don't know if anyone is excited about making some markup changes for Drupal Core. If we can fix this problem, it means that we can actually evolve the core markup that we have. Right now, it is unfortunately not possible. Let's go into even more serious and deeper problems, and just raise your hand if I'm not making sense at all, because it's definitely possible, because sometimes I do that. So let's talk about a little bit of the scalability issues that we have. How many of you participated in Mark Conroy's presentation yesterday about pattern labs? Quite a few. Almost half of the people seems like participated in the presentation yesterday, which is good. So this is kind of the chapter 2 of that presentation. It's like Mark presented like cool, awesome technology that we can do, and it's great. But we have a little bit of problems trying to implement that. So let's get into the problem. So basically why we do this is because of separation of concerns. So the traditional way of thinking in Drupal core is that we have HTML, we have CSS, and we have JS, and they all live in their own little buckets. But in the modern world where we think about components, the separation of concerns is that we have one component, we have another component, and they contain the HTML, CSS, and JS. This is an amazing slide. This is not done by me. I'm not as creative as the area web. I just noticed this this morning in Twitter, and I really wanted to include it in the presentation because it's my favorite slide that I've seen in Twitter for a very long time. It very clearly illustrates what the problem is, and this is definitely the direction where we want to go. This is the separation of concern that we want to have. So what we have in Drupal core right now is that we have these very, very tightly coupled components for a specific data type most of the time. We have some of them a little bit more less tightly coupled components. We have more loosely coupled components, but most of them would be these pretty tightly coupled components for a single use case or single data type, which means that components are not really reusable at all, effectively then preventing creating any kind of style guides or making your frontend in a way scalable. So in order to be able to create a style guide, what you have to have is a template where you can simply just populate some data, and it will kind of render something that looks like useful. But with Drupal, let's say something like contextual links that you want to demonstrate with Node template. Node template is responsible for actually outputting the contextual links markup. How the heck are you supposed to create a style guide with Node template which has contextual links? I don't know. I don't think it's possible. So with the current tools that we have, maybe we can change something and make it better. Also, the scalability is pretty bad if you have to duplicate your markup in multiple different places. Like if your design changes require markup changes, you have to go do some kind of search and replace or some kind of mass work to try to get all of your markup in a consistent state. Or maybe you don't even get them in a consistent state, and then you get a lot of bugs because of that. Working in parallel is very difficult because of you can't really test your templates without the site build being done. So in order to be able to test your template, you have to have the site build done because it doesn't work without Drupal, your template. And for that reason, working in parallel is difficult unless there's one person doing the work, which means that you are not really doing parallel work because it's just one person doing the work. And all of these problems are just mainly caused by the fact that single component is usually being responsible just rendering too many things at the same time. We don't have these small self-contained components that you could use to render just one thing. So definitely something needs to be done. And as I said, many of the building blocks are in place. We have a lot of problems related to that, even though we have the building blocks in place. But the problem is that because we are not dogfooding ourselves with this kind of way of thinking, we don't find the bugs in core. Let's say if we change something in Drupal core, because we don't have any examples of that in Drupal core, we don't really know if we break that kind of way of building your theme. So we really need some examples in Drupal core of how this kind of approach can be taken. There are some example themes if you are interested in this kind of approach, like more loosely coupled themes with the self-contained components with the nice separation of concerns. There is the Zen theme with KSS by John Albin. There is Pattern Lab as well, using the Pattern Lab design system, and then we have Slack channel in the Drupal Twig Slack, where there's a very active big group discussing about the problems related to this, who are trying to implement this kind of approach in their client projects. So if you run into any problems with these, Drupal Tweak Slack is definitely a good place to go to hang out with people and try to find solutions for your problems. But all of these approaches that I've seen so far with different teams, I've seen multiple different client projects which try to take one of these approaches. But there is a major drawback on each of the approaches that I've seen so far, which is something that we have to solve somehow in Drupal Core. So most of the approaches, they take one of these drawbacks that we have here. They choose which one is the less worse. So the first way of dealing with this is that you provide only a partial support for the features that Drupal Core has, meaning that if you build a site for a client, you might be able to choose it. Okay, my client doesn't need contextual links, my client doesn't need quick edit, my client doesn't need this and that. You can make a very well-informed decision that I'm not going to be supporting these features, and I'm going to just break everything. That's fine, but that approach is very difficult in a contributed project because you don't really know what the users of your team are going to need because you don't know the actual clients that are going to be using that team. So you can't really make a decision that I'm going to break half of the features that Drupal Core provides. Therefore, the second approach seems to be what most of the contributed projects takes, is that they make the front end only partially loosely coupled, meaning that you get the benefits of being loosely coupled and have a good separation of concerns in most part in the features that we have in Drupal Core, but not in all features that we have. Let's say what Zen does is that they render the node template as a one big chunk with all the fields, meaning that the quick edit and contextual links can still work, but you don't really get any of the benefits of being more self-contained or having separation of concern because everything is still kind of the same as it used to. But then almost everything else that you have except these entity templates, you can already use this approach. So it seems like most of the concept is taking the second trade-off. Maybe if you build your team for a client that you know well and you are able to make this informed decision making, maybe that's what you can do. Also, Dries has proposed a team component library initiative as one of the strategic initiatives for Drupal Core, meaning that they are kind of from the top-down coming initiatives, not from bottom-up, which the ideas project that we have in Drupal represents. So it's definitely an important thing for Drupal because of if the head of Drupal says that this is what we have to solve. So it's in a planned initiative phase. We had last discussion in DrupalCon Dublin, where we decided that we are going to put this in halt for the next 6 months because of there are some web components and other things that are kind of improving there, and we wanted to see if we could leverage some of that as part of this, but nothing has happened since after that. So it's still in the very same stage. There is not that much of momentum around this initiative. There are some other issues as well that people are working on. So the first one is the one about unifying and simplifying the render and theme system, which is the issue that Wimler's open, and this is the one that represents kind of the initiative. Then we have the second one, which is simply rebuilding the whole theme system and using Node.js for that in Drupal 9, which is an interesting approach, but maybe that's something we can consider. It seems like a little bit more radical approach. And then we have a third one, which is probably the least radical of these all approaches, which is just simply suggesting a few improvements to the theme system so that we could kind of be a little bit better at supporting this kind of approach for theming. So these are all issues that if you're interested in would be good to work on. Then we come to the most ranty part of this presentation, which is that we have a lot of complexity in Drupal core, and I see it as a problem. And a lot of the problems that we have with the components, with having the self-contained components, is that a lot of things are very complex. We have a lot of APIs, we have a lot of features that we have to support, and finding a simple API which could support all of these use cases just seems like a very difficult thing to do. This is definitely not a new thing to talk about. I found this picture from Twitter. I seem to be picking a lot of pictures from Twitter to my presentations. I found this picture from Twitter, and it is from the Drupal 7 era. They were hoping that something could be done for Drupal 8, but I don't think we got much better at Drupal 8. Maybe we did the opposite, actually. So render arrays of Doom was definitely something that people were talking about at 2012, and it got some momentum. But let's discuss about some of the problems that we have around render arrays. How many of you like render arrays? Does anyone like render arrays? Who doesn't like render? We have one person who likes render arrays. Who doesn't like render arrays? Well, we have 5, 6 people who doesn't like render arrays. Maybe 7. So how many of you don't have any opinion about this? Okay, most of the people don't have any opinion about that, which I think is good, because that's how it should be, which means that maybe it's just a problem for me as a maintainer, / someone who tries to make all of your sites kind of work while we make changes and not break them. It could be, but the big problem that we have is that everything is mutable. So that means that anything could change at any time. So mutability means that something can be changed, it can be reassigned. If we have immutability, it means that you cannot change what is there. If it's once been assigned, that's what it is. And a lot of the modern frameworks that we have implement some kind of immutability in this kind of systems, because it makes things a lot simpler. It makes things way less complex than they would be if you have mutability. And Drupal is one of the systems which kind of embraces the mutability. Like, we make everything mutable, and anything can change at any point of time. That's how a theme system works, which creates a lot of complexity. It also creates a lot of the problems that we have with the tightly coupled components. The fact that anything can change at any point of time, meaning that, let's say, if contextual links module changes something, and your team has to support that change, it means that your team is coupled with contextual links module, because they work together in this matter, and they can't work without each other. It's impossible to know what is our API, like what is the things that we support for people, because the API is just such a huge amount of things. We don't have an API that would be well documented and that someone could understand. And it makes debugging complex. So how many of you have sometimes debugged something related to render arrays? Yeah, there's quite a few people who has actually debugged something related to render arrays. So it is some kind of a problem then. So I have an example from Drupal site. So we have 2 controllers. We have one for page, one for article. I'm using everything that theme system and render system provides, pretty much everything that I possibly could. So this is kind of from the complex end of the example, but this is how a lot of the sites that I built could look like. Maybe under the hood, maybe it doesn't show us, maybe it doesn't look like this, but this is how most of them would work. So we have a controller for article, which we use an example here. We have a printer element with some default values. We have pre-render functions for those. Then we have a lot of different kind of preprocess functions. So we have the template preprocess, which is kind of a single instance of preprocess functions. Then we have default preprocess functions, which can be multiple. So any module can add new ones if you want. Then we have preprocess functions for the suggestions, and template and template override. Okay, what happens is that client comes with, I have a bug, and it's in this article page. Please find where this bug is. That is your job. So what am I gonna do? So I have this picture. I don't debug anything with the real code. I always debug it using the chart. That's how I work. So I go to the controller. Because of that initially sets the values for the render array. So the bug definitely could be into controller. Essentially, the bug could be also in the render element default values because of those also change the state of the render array being rendered. Of course, it could be in pre-render functions because those also modify your render arrays. It could be in your template preprocess. It could be in your default preprocess functions because all of these are able to change your render array. It could be in your preprocess for the suggestion for article, and it could be in your template. And this could be even more complex. It could be even in the default template because Twig can extend other templates. So there's quite a few places, and the number of these, it varies. Like, it doesn't even have to be just the fact that you have these. Maybe just because of one is missing or one was being added by some module broke your site, like you enabled panels and they do something with preprocess and that happened to broke your site, which actually happened to me a week ago. I tried to build this small website and I enabled layout plugins and it broke my whole site because they have a preprocess function. So thank you, and that's how preprocess functions work. Then I spent 2 hours debugging what the heck was going on. So as we can see, there is a lot of space where a bug could happen. A lot of places where you have to take a look at that maybe they are causing the bug that you're having. And some features that we have in Drupal Core actually rely on these things being in place. They rely that this API is available. So let's say quick edit and contextual links, how they work is that they inject in a very tricky way markup into your node template and other entity templates. And they just kind of read if there is some specific variables available, and then they figure out, and okay, this is a node template. I should be adding these variables to this render array. And then it expects that your node template actually outputs them in the end. This is not documented in the node template that this is what happens. It simply just has an variable being printed in the node template. And these modules expect that someone outputs those variables. I don't know what is your way of teaming, but for me, it's like, I just look what variables there are. I'm like, well, I'm not outputting anything on my title prefix or title suffix. Yeah, I'm gonna remove them, of course. And well, you are not supposed to do that because you need them for quick edit and contextual links. But it is not documented anywhere, so it's definitely not intuitive for new people because you just find that you've broke some things. Maybe they don't even know that they broke something because it can be kind of tricky to see that contextual links are broken, and until your client comes back and says, well, these things are not working anymore. Yeah, so how it used to work also was that if attributes or markup was kind of not rendered the correct way, that we just draw 500 lines of error messages to your JavaScript console. We've actually fixed that. We've made the experience a little bit better so that we give you a nice message with instructions how to fix this problem. So now it's actually somehow doable to fix these bugs, but still, this is not the way things should be done. There might be a better approach for this type of features, which would essentially allow us to remove the whole preprocess, probably a big chunk of our theme system. So definitely the first step for us would be to make it explicit and clear that there is a dependency between components, that they are not self-contained. They require something to happen. That would be maybe the first step for us to do. Then I think the second step, how many of you are aware of higher order function pattern? 1 person, 2 person. That's a very, very popular approach taken by React. Before that, it wasn't as popular, I would say. It means that you have a function, and you can pass for that function another function, and it essentially it runs the other function inside your function in a specific way. And I don't know if you know theme wrappers in render arrays. That's kind of a comparison of higher order function. It's kind of like you take this render array, you give it for another render array, and it renders your render array inside that render array. I don't know, my explanation is really bad, I'm sorry, but it means that basically you can just tell that I have this node, please render this inside node wrapper. And then the node wrapper can do whatever it wants, and what you change in the node template doesn't affect what the node wrapper does. So that's what higher order functions can do. And we have a very, very good usage of higher order functions in Drupal core. So what outside in module does is that they take the page render array. So we have the page template. It has render array. It adds a theme wrappers for the render array printing the page template. And it adds a wrapper around the page template, which essentially adds all of the markup that is required for printing whatever the outside in requires. And you can change whatever the heck you want in your page template, and it will never break outside in. So it's actually a really nicely working pattern. I don't know if this is going to work for all of these use cases. I actually wanted to try it because it shouldn't be too difficult to do with fields and nodes to make the contextual links and quick edit work, because they already kind of do something like this, but not exactly like this. So it should be doable. And I personally believe that that would solve a major problem for ourselves. But that would require that we accept the fact that if node template has to support quick edit and contextual links, that we tell there, wrap this node template with quick edit, wrap this with contextual links. It means that in contextual links module, you can't really do this by yourself automatically, or unless maybe we could cut corners and we could allow it, but then we lose maybe some of the benefits. But it would, in my in my world, which is always perfect, I would see it as something that you would do in team. You would tell that render this as something that supports quick edit. Render this as something that supports contextual links. More problems that we have with the theme system is that we have no type validation. This is partly because of PHP problem, but not really because we could implement it ourselves. But PHP in general is not very strict about type validation, so anything can be any type and it can change its type at any point, which is a very easy cause for bugs. It's also difficult to debug because you have to, besides of like the logic, you have to also worry about the type all the time. And it's especially problematic with the fact that everything is readable, because the type could be also one of the things that changes. So in PHP and in Drupal, something like this is totally legal. Like, you have an ID and someone just decides to wrap that into an array for some reason, and that could be a really easy cause for some really strange bugs that you run in your site. Maybe this is not that much of a valid use case, but there are some other use cases where it's really tricky to try to figure out what is happening. So, as a conclusion of all of these things that I've been thinking while making this presentation, while thinking in my head before that, is one front end for all still enough? Can we survive with just one front end solution? Because it seems like it's kind of a fragmented community, that we have some people who want to build something using React, some people who want to use Angular, some people who want to still use PHP to render their sites. I think the way front-end developers in general work is that they just choose whatever the heck tools they like to use. Like, this problem would be best solved with Vue.js, or this problem would be best solved with React, and then they go with that solution. Not like that we have a Dries, who is the CTO of Acquia, telling all of these people, Vue is the best JavaScript framework, you should all use this JavaScript framework. I don't see that the front end work would work that way. I see that everyone should be able to choose whatever they want, and that's definitely a big problem that we have to somehow try to solve. Good example is that Twig adds some really nice features, but there is a lot of cost of having those features. It adds a lot of code, it adds a lot of complexity, there's a lot of social cost of having Twig, so people have to learn a totally new language of having Twig. But does those features necessarily benefit everyone? Not necessarily. Maybe someone doesn't need what Twig provides. I mean, Twig is really nice, and I think what you think is that you want to fire up your torches and be like, oh, you are crazy. I really appreciate the efforts made by the Twig people. I think Twig is great and awesome, but I just don't think that it solves any problems for everyone in this world. Like, what Twig does, it makes a lot of security hardening, that it does a lot of improvements for the front-end developers. Maybe someone doesn't need them, because a lot of those things are just that you can choose not to do those things that Twig prevents you from doing, and then you have a lot less complexity in your project. It's just like, what is your personal preference? And therefore, I think people should be able to choose what they use. And maybe Twig should be just one of the front-end tools people could choose to opt in to use when they use Drupal. Then I've started even thinking, what if Drupal doesn't have any templates out of the box? Kind of that you would have to choose that I want these templates, download them, and if you want to use Twig, they would be written in Twig. If you want to use PHP template, they would be written in PHP template. And Drupal, when you download it as a package, we would have a composer dependency for a Twig package, which has the Twig templates, and that's what we ship with. But if someone wants to use by default some PHP templates, then you could download a different package, and then you wouldn't have to worry about Twig in any way. So, with this opening, let's have a little bit of discussion. What do you think? Do you think I'm crazy, or what's up? What do you think? So we have someone.
First of all, thank you for exposing yourself, put yourself in that difficult situation to give that presentation. My question is that, what Drupal wants to be? Should Drupal be a product that will help us to create websites, or should it be a tool in order to give us all the options to build our own platform?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and that's like where we very easily end up into discussing when we have these difficult discussions about like how do we want Drupal to work. And I think the problem, which I made a presentation about this 1 year ago in Frontend United, where it was kind of like the topic was like, what are we trying to be? Are we trying to be everything in the world? That we should probably focus on something so that we could be a little bit leaner than what we are right now. But I think there's ways to kind of be a lot of things like we are right now. But I think a big part of it comes with different kind of packaging, like and distributions and things like that. That I think that Drupal itself should be pretty small itself, but we should bundle it with distributions. And the Drupal package that we have as we know it probably should be just a distribution that you could download. And it should be just one of the many options that you could have of Drupal. Because Drupal as a tool definitely is powerful enough to be used that way. But it's more of, I think, a product management decision, like what do they want, how are we supposed to be marketing Drupal for our customers. Because right now the big part of the sales pitch is also just that Drupal comes from here and it solves all of these problems out of the box for you, like when we just install it. And if that's still relevant for us, then it could be best that we are where we are right now. It could be. Maybe the distribution could solve that problem as well. I don't know. It's a very difficult discussion, and I think we should be having that discussion as well. Any other discussions or questions or comments?
Yeah. I can say that
No,
because
we can use the mic, so it's on the recording then.
my question actually is Twig debugging. It's quite of a hassle. Is there any timeline or plan for it? Because at the moment there's a module for it, but it's still a lot of fuss to work with it.
Yeah, so this is kind of exactly the complexity that I was talking about, that like Twig adds a big layer of complexity that not every developer wants to go through. Like, let's say debugging Twig template is really complex because of, like, you have this huge layer of code being applied and essentially creating a totally new programming language. So I personally think that we have to improve the tools that we have in Twig, but maybe if you are that hardcore kind of person that you have to debug Twig in very hardcore way, maybe there would be a better solution for your theming problems. So I personally think that we have to improve Twig, but maybe using other templating language could be also beneficial. Because then you wouldn't need these very complex debugging tools. What?
We just want Chromo back, that's all.
Yeah, so the big problem with debuggers is as well, I guess the memory consumption is the problem. And that goes to the fact that we have the arrays of Doom in Drupal. So the arrays are just simply huge. Like, let's say if you output the node render array, it probably contains the node object like 3 or 4 times in there. Probably even more actually, because of every field item possibly contains node. So yeah, it's just simply that the render array architecture we have is faulty. And it's probably not that much about the tool anymore, if we talk about that problem. Yeah. Any other? Yeah, there is more. Perfect.
Just for the person at the back that was looking for Chromo, we don't use Kint for debugging because when we turn it on, our sites crash because it's too big. But we use vardumpers from Symfony, and it's an option in the develop module that you can select, but it's grayed out. So if you just type composer require vardumper, you get that, and it's like Chromo, and it's blindingly fast. And it doesn't give you all the methods and the objects and things, it just gives you the variables that you want for frontending.
Yeah, I personally used keys filter from Twig. So it simply just prints the keys that you have in a current render array, and then you can kind of predict what is inside those keys based on the key name, and that works fairly well. So it's just simply the bar and then keys, the pipe and then keys. Any more comments? Any more questions? It seems like I have about 70 people staring at me, like, what am I supposed to ask you? Which means probably that we don't have any questions anymore. Thank you, everyone.